March 1997, police walked into a mansion outside San Diego and found 39 bodies. Same purple shroud, same black Nike sneakers, same $5 bill and quarters in every pocket. This wasn't a mass murder. It was a mass exit, planned, rehearsed, and calm. This is the story of Heaven's Gate. And what almost nobody tells you is how close this group came to just being a footnote in American religious history, instead of one of the most infamous cults ever recorded. It starts in the early 1970s with two people, Marshall Applewhite, a former music professor with a background in choral direction, and Bonnie Nettles, a nurse with a deep interest in astrology, theosophy, and mysticism. Applewhite had recently gone through a personal crisis. He'd lost a teaching job and had spent time in a psychiatric facility, wrestling with his identity and his place in the world. Nettles had spent years studying esoteric religious texts and claimed to receive messages from a being she called a monk, who had died centuries earlier. They met almost by accident in a Texas hospital in 1972, where Applewhite had gone for treatment. Within weeks, the two became inseparable. Not romantically, both were clear about that, but on some other level neither could fully explain. They became convinced they'd found each other for a reason, that they were the two witnesses described in the Book of Revelation, chapter 11, sent to guide humanity to the next level of existence before the end of an age. They called themselves the Two. Later, followers would know them as Do and T, names borrowed from musical notes, chosen because Applewhite believed their true names couldn't be captured in human language. Here's the part that made Heaven's Gate different from almost every other cult of that era. Applewhite and Nettles weren't preaching hellfire, or salvation through suffering, or a wrathful God. Their pitch was almost science fiction, wrapped in the language of Scripture. They taught that the earth was about to be spiritually and physically recycled, wiped clean and started over, the same way it had allegedly happened before in Earth's deep history. The only way to survive the recycling was to shed your human body, which they referred to as a vehicle, and evolve into a genderless, immortal being. Higher-level beings, not gods but literal extraterrestrial-like entities operating a level above human evolution, were said to be waiting to collect true believers and take them to the next level aboard a literal spacecraft. This blend mattered. In the early 70s, UFO sightings were being reported constantly across the U.S. The New Age movement was exploding in popularity, and Watergate-era distrust of government and religious institutions was at an all-time high. Applewhite and Nettles weren't offering blind faith. They were offering what felt, to a lot of people, like an explanation, one dressed in the language of science and technology instead of hellfire. They began holding public lectures, first in small numbers, church basements, community centers, college towns across the West and Midwest. Flyers advertised talks with titles like UFOs, Why They Are Here, Who They Have Come For, and When They Will Leave. The pitch at these meetings was blunt, almost aggressively so. Leave your job, leave your family, leave your possessions right now, and follow us to the next level. No time to think it over. No time to say goodbye. And people did. Hundreds of people, across dozens of cities, walked out of their lives on short notice. It became national news in September of 1975, when around 20 people vanished overnight from a small town in Oregon after attending one of these lectures. NBC ran a report on it. Reporters called it a UFO cult and treated it at the time as a strange but temporary phenomenon. A story that would fade once the group inevitably fell apart. It didn't fall apart. It went quiet instead, and quiet is far more dangerous. At its peak, the group had over 200 followers scattered in small communal households across the country, moving locations regularly to avoid outside attention and to keep followers disoriented and dependent on the group's structure. Individual identity was systematically dismantled. Members took on childlike androgynous names, almost always ending in Odie, names like Winity, Junity, Srodi. Hair was cut short and uniform, clothing was plain and matching, contact with the outside world, family, old friends, independent news, was minimized to almost nothing, and any information from outside had to be filtered through Applewhite's teachings first. Daily life ran on strict schedules and constant self-monitoring. Members kept notebooks logging their own thoughts and impulses, watching for anything that reflected human weakness: attachment, ego, desire. Relationships and sexuality were discouraged early on, then banned outright. In 1996, several male members, including Applewhite himself, chose to undergo surgical castration, traveling to Mexico for the procedure, framing it as removing the final biological distraction standing between them and the next level. To an outsider, this reads as horrifying. To the people inside, after years of incremental steps, it was simply the next logical stage of a process they'd already committed to completely. By the 1980s and into the 90s, the group needed a way to sustain itself without drawing attention. They found it in an unlikely place: the internet. Members founded a web design company called Higher Source, building professional websites for real businesses. It's a strange detail that rarely makes the headlines. The same people who believed a spacecraft was waiting behind a comet were, during business hours, writing HTML and billing corporate clients. The income kept the group housed, fed, and completely self-contained, with almost no need to interact with mainstream society beyond client work. In 1985, Bonnie Nettles died of cancer. This is a turning point that gets skipped over in a lot of retellings, but it mattered enormously. The group's entire theology had been built around the two ascending together, side by side, as living proof that a human body could transition into the next level without dying first. Nettles's death broke that promise in the most literal way possible. Applewhite had to rewrite the theology in real time, reframing her death as her graduating early, leaving her physical vehicle behind, and moving on ahead of the rest of the group, who would eventually catch up. From this point forward, physical death stopped being the failure it once was. It became an acceptable, even necessary, part of the exit process. Some researchers who've studied the group point to this moment as the single biggest shift that made the events of 1997 theologically possible. In July of 1995, two amateur astronomers spotted a new object in the night sky: Comet Hale-Bopp, one of the brightest comets to pass near Earth in decades. As it grew more visible through late 1996, a rumor began circulating in UFO enthusiast circles that a companion object was trailing behind the comet, a hidden spacecraft, invisible to mainstream telescopes. Professional astronomers dismissed the claim almost immediately as a misread image. Applewhite did not dismiss it. To him and his followers, this was exactly the sign they had been waiting 22 years for. The ride, at long last, had arrived. Between March 22nd and March 26th, 1997, the group carried out what they called their human individual metamorphosis, their term for the transition out of the physical body. In staggered shifts, a small group went first. The remaining members cleaned up after them, then took their own turns over the following days, layering the departures so the process stayed calm, orderly, and undisturbed by the physical presence of the dead. Each member ate a mixture of phenobarbital and applesauce, washed down with vodka, then lay down and had a plastic bag secured over their head by companions who had not yet taken their turn. They dressed identically: black shirts, black sweatpants, brand new black and white Nike Decades sneakers. Each had a $5 bill and quarters in their pocket, which some investigators believe was meant as toll money for whatever journey lay ahead. Applewhite, at 65, was among the last to go. When police finally entered the rented mansion in Rancho Santa Fe after a tip from a former member, they found the bodies laid out with eerie precision. On bunk beds, faces and torsos covered with diamond-shaped purple shrouds, hands folded, packed bags sitting beside each body as if they were about to leave on a trip, because, in their minds, they were. Here's what keeps people obsessed with this case. Almost 30 years later, there was no armed standoff, no violence in the traditional sense, no external force. These were educated, functional people, engineers, computer programmers, nurses, web designers, who spent up to 2 decades slowly restructuring their entire identity around one idea, and then followed through with total calm, in an order they'd planned themselves. A small number of former members left the group before the end, some by choice, some asked to leave for not being fully committed. A handful of them are still alive today, and some still don't fully reject the underlying philosophy, even while grieving the friends they lost. To this day, no one fully agrees on whether this was mass manipulation by two damaged people or something closer to a genuinely shared delusion that consumed everyone equally, leaders included. That's the part true crime shows leave out. This wasn't a spontaneous act of madness. It was the final step of a plan 22 years in the making, built one small, surrendered choice at a time. Follow for more stories like this, because the truth is always stranger than the headline.